Everyone, good morning. Good morning. As Matt said, I want this to be interactive. So feel free to interrupt if you have questions, comments. I don't just want to speak for the next 2 hours. I think we learn more when we all participate. You don't have to, but if you have questions, let's do it. I know people. Let me ask you, how many of you are new agents? Let me just raise your hand. Let me just an idea of how many new agents. All right. I think just a few hands. So, and the nice thing is that we always have a different array of people on. I mean, from agents who've never had to complete a listing contract to those who've been in business for a long time. And so we can all bring things to the table. So, but let's just start. Let's start. Well, let me just say this. One of the things I love about the documents, and we do one on listing contracts, a buyer agency contract, agreement, sale. One of the things I learned early, I got a license back in 2000. And since then I got a broker's license. I have my own brokerage in Philadelphia, one here in Florida and Delaware. And the one thing that I learned early on was the importance of knowing what is in these documents. And I remember a quick story. I tell you that I was representing this buyer. Buyer was having trouble getting. We had a mortgage commitment, the pre-approval. The commitment was late. The bank was not that great, but I remember that the agent calling me up. The agent for the seller calling up and said, "Hey, Trent, we're going to give you another 2 days to get this commitment to us. Otherwise, we're just going to keep the buyer's $10,000 earnest money deposit." And I said to the agent who had been in business for a long time, and I was a relatively new agent, and I said, "No, you can't do that." And she said, "Oh, yes, we can." And I said, "No." And I said, "I want you to pull up the agreement sale." And I showed her an agreement sale where it said that if the seller terminates the agreement to sell because the buyer was not able to get the commitment in the time that they were supposed to, then the seller could terminate, but must return the earnest money deposit. And when I showed it to the agent, she had no idea that it was even in there. And so I say that to say that you'll be a better agent if you know what's in these documents. But two, you'll be a better negotiator, because here is an agent who was trying to intimidate me because I was a new agent. But if I didn't know, I would have just said, "Oh, okay," and thought that my client would lose her money if we didn't get this commitment by this date. So I look at these documents almost like tools, like a contractor's tools. If you had a contractor come to your house and the contractor didn't know how to use the tools that he or she brought with him or her, then you probably would be looking for a new contractor, wouldn't you? And these are our tools. Realtors, these are our tools, and we should know them. And I think that's one of the benefits of these type of seminars. So having said that, let's just get started. If any comments, any questions, just feel free to interrupt. All right. Well, let's start with what I always like a good starting place is a consumer notice. First document you should give to a customer, when you have, let's pull up, are the documents up, Donna? All the documents. Take a look at the consumer notice. I don't have to go through the whole thing, but I just want you to, let's read the first paragraph, because that's the important part. In an effort, and remember, tell clients this is not a contract. Sometimes when you first meet a client, what will they tell you? "I want to sign in a contract. I want to sign in a contract." I've heard that a million times. I always highlight this section. This says this is not a contract. So you're signing something that's not a contract. What you're signing is a document that I have to give you by Pennsylvania law. I must give you this document to let you know what the different business relationship choices you could have with me, the licensee. So, but you're not entering into a contract. So I always highlight this is not a contract. So you can sign it. You can never come back to me ever again. But I have to give you this. And agents, if you don't know, you have to keep this document for at least 6 months. A lot of agents don't know that. A lot of agents don't do that. If this person does not turn into a client, and this and you never see that person again, you must keep this consumer notice for at least 6 months. You, the licensee, should keep this for at least 6 months. If it becomes a transaction occurs and your broker, I mean, obviously there's going to be a file created, and your broker has to keep this for a minimum of 3 years. But you have to keep this document for at least the second part, the signature page, for a minimum of 6 months. So keep that in mind. A lot of brokers, a lot of agents tend to forget that. But take a look at the first paragraph. It says, in an effort to enable consumers of real estate services to make informed decisions about the business relationships they may have with the real estate broker or salesperson, the licensee, the Real Estate License and Registration Act requires that consumers be provided with this notice at the initial interview. And then what is the initial interview? Well, the act defines the initial interview as the first contact between the agent and the consumer, where a substantive discussion about real estate occurs, substantive conversation. If someone calls you on the phone and says, hey, Marie Paul, what's the zoning classification on this property I just saw in Northern Liberties? You say zone RS5A. That's not a substantive conversation. That's information that's in the public domain. But if that same person called and says, hey, Marie Paul, I have a $300,000 pre-approval from the credit union, I have $50,000 saved, that's substantive. That's a meaningful or an important discussion. And before you engage with that consumer, you must first give that consumer this consumer notice so they know what the different business relationship choices they could have with you. A seller's agent, obviously, if it was a buyer, they won't be a seller's agent. Buyer's agent, well, be the buyer's agent, but then they could be a dual agent. You have to let them know that I can represent both you and the seller in the same transaction. Some buyers may not want that. I like to say I've been involved in, I think, over 1,000 transactions in my day. And I would say probably 2 times in my life, I heard a buyer or seller say, I don't really want you to represent both parties. And keep in mind, anytime you are a dual agent, you must get written, not verbal, written consent from both parties. Written consent. Otherwise, you are breaking you're violating actually Section 604 of the Real Estate License and Registration Act. But you need written consent. All right. Designated agent. Some offices practice designated agents. So we'll talk about that a little later. If you don't know if your office does, if you don't know, they probably don't. If you don't, not sure, ask a broker. Do we practice designated agency? Normally, designated agency is well. Let's talk about it. Designated agency, broker designates one licensee, one salesperson to represent the interests of the seller, designates another agent to represent the interests of the buyer. The reason I believe for designated agency is avoid dual agency, because if you're a designated agent, the broker is a dual agent because you both work in the same company, but none of your co-workers they have no relationship to either buyer or seller. But in a normal dual agency situation, if one person's a dual agent, one agent in office represents the seller, another agent in office represents the buyer, then obviously the broker is a dual agent because they work on the same brokerage, but everyone with a license in that company is also a dual agent. But a designated agency, you have no interest, you have no connection to the buyer or the seller in a designated agency office. But I believe that the reason for designated agency is to avoid dual agency. But let's continue. A transaction licensee, you can say, hey, I could be a transaction licensee, which basically means that I'm going to do paperwork. I'm a non-agent. A transaction licensee is a non-agent. I don't represent you. All I'm doing is paperwork. I'm filling in blanks on this paperwork. Maybe you come to me and say, hey, I'm selling my house to my sister for this amount. She's going to put down this amount of money. We're going to close this day. She's going to do a home inspection. They give you the information, you put it in the form, but you can't give any advice or consent because you're not their agent. You are a non-agent. You're simply there to make sure all the paperwork that is required in Pennsylvania be filled out, like a consumer notice, seller's disclosure, lead-based payment, all the documents that are needed in this transaction. You, as a transaction licensee, need to make sure they are completed accurately. But you're not representing either party, and you decide what that commission will be along with your broker. Any questions? If a person is on the telephone, calling on the telephone, how do you get this consumer notice to them if they're on the telephone? If they call you and ask you, start getting into some substantive discussion with you about real estate, how would you then get this consumer notice to them? Anybody know? Could you email it to them? What form gets signed for dual agency? There is not a form. My office created our own form. So your office may have one, but I've created my own form that just I give to both the buyer and the seller that says, hey, the brokerage is representing both the buyer and the seller, and you are consenting to it. And so you sign off, and so you know that the buyer and the seller are clear that the company, the brokerage, is representing both. But I ask you, if someone's on the telephone with you and they start giving you all this confidential information, how do you get this to them clearly? You can text it, you can email it, but if they can't do any of that, there is an oral consumer notice that must be read verbatim. There is an oral consumer notice. It's pretty short. I think I have it here. It reads, and you have to read it verbatim. So if someone's on the telephone and there's no way you can get this consumer notice to them, and once you meet them in person, you have to give them an actual copy of it, have them sign it, and you keep it for either 6 months. And if it turns into a transaction, your broker keeps it for 3 years. And it reads verbatim. You would have to read before someone starts giving you all this confidential information that you could use against them, because remember, they're not a client, they're a customer. Only when they become a customer do you owe them the duty of confidentiality, not when they are a client, a consumer. The real estate license law requires that I provide you with a written consumer notice that describes the various business relationship choices that you may have with the real estate licensee. Since we are discussing real estate without you having the benefit of the consumer notice, I have the duty to advise you that any information you give me at this time is not considered to be confidential. And any information you give me will not be considered confidential unless and until you and I enter into a business relationship, a contract. At our first meeting, I will provide you with a written consumer notice which explains those business relationships and my corresponding duties to you. And those business relationships are listed in the consumer notice. Any questions? Any comments? You all bored already? Am I boring you all? No? Okay, let's go on. Let's go to the listing contract. Thank you, Perry. All right, let's go to the listing contract. This is an exclusive right to sell. There are 3 types of listing contracts: exclusive right to sell, an exclusive agency listing, and an open listing. PAR only has the exclusive right to sell in their library forms. Most brokers probably won't use anything other than the exclusive right to sell. But, that's between you and your broker. If you all want to use the exclusive agency or one of others, the difference between the exclusive right to sell, basically the seller's hiring one company, one brokerage to sell his or her property. Regardless of who finds a buyer, the seller, during that listing period, the seller must compensate the broker. So in other words, if you have an exclusive right to sell, the seller goes to work on Monday, his coworker says, hey, John, I wanted to buy your house. I see that it's for sale. John sells it to his coworker. During the contract is not expired. Let's say the contract expires at the end of August. This is August 4th. They make a transaction. They sell it in a week. Then the commission listed in this contract still must be paid to the brokerage. So with an exclusive right to sell, it doesn't matter who finds a buyer. If this property is sold or exchanged during the listing period, then the commission must be paid to the company, the brokerage. Any questions? All right, let's go to first one, broker, the company. You need to fill this out. And I'm glad they put company, because sometimes I used to see people put the name of the broker of record. This is the name of the company. Wyker or Berkshire, the name of the company, company's address, phone number, fax number, and then your information, the licensee. If there's more than one licensee, if there's a co-agent, if there are 2 or 3 of you working on this together, you should put all your information here. This is a contract. All right. If there are 2 of you, put your information and put their information, phone number, cell phone, email, fax, seller's name. If there's more than one seller, you need to put all the sellers. Again, this is a contract. It becomes a contract once it's signed by all the parties, but it's not going to be a valid contract if you left out one of the parties. If there are 2 sellers, both sellers the names must be here, and they should both sign it. Use their full names. If they have middle initials, if they're junior, senior, don't just put John Smith. If they're John F. Smith Jr., then put John F. Smith Jr. All right. Seller's mailing address. Remember, if the seller is selling, maybe the seller is selling a property they don't live in, but you want to make sure you know where the seller lives, because if the seller sells his property, if you ever need to get in touch with them, how do you do it? So even if this is a property they're selling, you should probably go back and put in your file a forwarding address for the seller, because sometimes you may have to get in touch with the seller. Make sure you have the seller's phone number, email, fax number, any information you can get. Hopefully you won't have to get in touch with them again, but there are times where you will. Seller understands, paragraph 13, number 13, seller understands that this listing contract between the broker and the seller. Why is that there? Because this contract does not belong to you. It belongs to the broker, the company. So if you quit, that's fine, but your broker may or may not let you take your listings, your clients with you, but the contract is between the company and the seller. You're just an agent. You're just a representative of that company. You sign it on behalf of this company, but this listing does not belong to you. So if you quit, you say, hey, I've got 5 listings. I'm going over to a new company. Well, that's fine. You go right ahead, but you leave behind all my listings. All right. We'll just get another agent to continue with them when you're gone. All right. Does the seller have a listing contract for this property with another broker? Well, it hopefully is a no. It should be a no, because there's an exclusive right to sell, which means they've hired one broker, one company to sell this property. But if they say yes, you really need to stop and figure out why do they have 2 contracts? Now, I remember one of my agents once had the seller said, yes, I have another contract. But what the seller did, they said they're giving us 3 months to sell the property, but if not, they had already contacted another office to give them 3 months that started the day after our contract. So technically they had 2 contracts, but not at the same time. So that was perfectly fine. And it gives you, and usually you're gonna say no, but you also have to, but I don't want to get into that. I was gonna say that even if they told you I have 2 exclusive right to sell contracts with 2 different companies, then they would be responsible for paying 2 commissions. Because remember, it doesn't matter who brings it by. I think I'm giving too much information. Let's go to number 1, paragraph number 1, the property. The address of the property, clearly, right at the full address. The municipality, if it's in Philadelphia, obviously it'd be Philadelphia. If it's out in the county, make sure you have the township. I've even seen brokers or agents put properties that were in Delaware County. They say there was Montgomery County. Just don't be sloppy with this. Take your time. Again, this is a legal document. Once it's signed, it becomes a binding legal document. Once it's signed by all the parties, don't be sloppy with it. Take your time. Make sure it's right. Do zoning. You can get the zoning by going to public records. Make sure you have the zoning correct. These things become important. List the present use. Sometimes we know that a seller, that property is zoned for one purpose, but is being used for another purpose. Let's say property is zoned is residentially zoned, but the seller converted part of it and made it into like a commercial, put a storefront on the bottom. So now it's being used as a mixed-use property, but it's zoned residential. So you just have to put that in, and obviously you will put that in MLS, because you can't sell a property to someone that's paying cash if there's a mortgage loan involved. She's asking, is an oral consumer notice and zip forms? If not, I think we can get it. We can probably get it in there. So just make sure if the zoning is different from the present use, just make sure you note that. The identification, the tax ID number, again, you'll get that out of public records. Paragraph 2, any questions? I like questions, you all. I hate it when I don't get questions. I feel like people aren't learning anything. Is that, are we okay? Could somebody say something? Say this is horrible. This is, I wish you would stop talking.
You're doing great. We're on it.
You're
All right,
doing great.
you.
Yes.
All right, thank
Learning
you,
a lot.
Jennifer. But all right, let's go to
Renee had
paragraph 2.
said-
Start and end date. This is the term of this contract. First, I'll look at 2B, starting date. This contract starts when signed by the broker and the seller unless otherwise stated here. The contract will start when the buyer, after the last party is signed. Here's something that I would recommend, or I think a best practice. Always let the seller sign this document first. Then you sign it once you get it back. Why is that? Because you said you sign it today and the seller signs in the 3 days, it becomes effective in 3 days. What if you sign it today, you send it to the seller, they sign it in 3 days, they send it to you, they send it back to you 2 days later. When does this contract start? When does it end? It can be a little confusing. It's better if you give it to the seller signs it. Once the seller signs it, sends it back to you, you sign it that date. That's the date that this contract began. Because you signed it last, both parties have now signed. We know the start date and we know the end date, because the contract lasts for 3 months or 6 months or a year, whatever it is. We know the start date and end date without having to try to figure out if there becomes an issue. Everything is always good till there's an issue. Okay, there's never a problem until there's a problem. So if you just let the seller sign it first, you sign it second. The end date of this contract, I mentioned, it says it cannot be more than 1 year. You cannot have a listen contract in Pennsylvania more than 365 days. And that tells you, it says if the end date written in this contract creates a term that is longer than 1 year, the end date is automatically 364 days from the starting date of this contract. You can't have a listen contract that can't have an automatic renewal clause
We're gonna make
or any of that.
avocado. Yeah, that's.
Is there a question?
Trent, you've muted yourself.
Oops, I'm sorry. That last, how long was I muted?
Just for a second. It was
Okay.
like the last thing, yeah.
Someone put a question that says, is there a time frame? What was that in reference to? A time frame?
I'm wondering if there is a standard for the length of the contract. So some people say 3 months, some people say 6 months. Is there a standard across the business?
No. And I'm glad you asked that, and keep this in mind, that in real estate, everything is what? Negotiable. There is no such thing as a standard, especially when you start thinking about commissions and rates of commissions or fees, because we know that's an antitrust violation if one broker reaches out to another broker to discuss fees. So don't think in real estate anything being standard. Whatever you negotiate with your client. If you want, I've had listen contracts for 1 day up to 1 year. And I remember I had one for 1 day because I was selling property in Brewery Town. The seller said, how much time do you need? I said, I only need a day. I need 24 hours to get you an offer. She said, that's it? And I said, yes. I did an open house and I had 65 people come and I had 42 offers by the end of the day. And I knew I would. So it was, so I didn't need a long contract, but it's whatever you want. I can tell you personally, I don't do 1 year contracts. I don't do 6 months. For me, it's 3 months. I feel like I may not want to work with you after 3 months. You may not, well, you'll want to work with me, but I may not want to work with you after 3 months. So it is up to, some sellers don't want a long one. It's up to you and the seller. But I think a year, for me personally, seems like an awful long time to get a property sold. I would fire you after 3 months myself, but you know, that's just me personally. All right, where are we? Look at dual agency.
Hey,
Dual
Trent.
agent.
I-
Yes, sir.
I had a question on this, but somebody had their virtual hand up. I don't want to skip a net had a question. And
I had a question.
Go on.
Good morning. Thank you, Trent. Just out of curiosity, and not to belabor it, but the situation where some people had did like, I think it was like a 40-year listing. I was just, that whole situation in Philadelphia.
Right.
And I was just wondering if the comment that you were making about Pennsylvania for 1 year, if there was any stance on that without getting into great details.
I don't know, Nat, if it's related, if that's the reason they related 1 year. I don't know. I think, and you've been around a while, Annette, you know that 1 year that's a long time for a listing contract. I think that's a long time, unless you have some specialty type property that may take a long time to sell. I can probably see that, but a row house in Frankfurt, the 3-bedroom, 1-bath row house in Frankfurt, do I need a year to sell that? Probably not. I hope not. I've never done a 1-year contract. I wouldn't even, but again, I let my agents decide. I just personally have never done one. Because I just tell the sellers, listen, you may not be happy with my services after 3 months. Let's renegotiate this because, let's talk about the listing price, because that's here, the listing price. And I give you something that I've always done, and a lot of agents like this, or brokers I've talked to. Whatever the list price, sometimes we take listings at a little overpriced. We've all done it. I'm not talking about a property that you believe is 400,000 and you listing it for 700. I mean, maybe it's 400 and the seller wants to start at 440, and it's too high. One of the things that I've always done, when the seller, we know that is overpriced, but I'm allowing the seller, I'm willing to list it high. But what I do, I put it in a contract. I negotiate this. It's always better to negotiate everything up front than on the back end. I say, okay, we'll list it for 440, but we need to figure out, when do we have price reductions? So in other words, if we're gonna list it for 440 for 10 days, on this date, we reduce it to this price. On this date, we reduce it to so I don't go back and ask the seller for price reduction on a property that I know is overpriced. I just put it in the bottom. If you look at the back of this document, under additional terms, I just put under additional terms that the price, if we don't have an offer on it before this date, the price will reduce to this, and I just lay it out. So I don't have to go back to sell. Now the seller could come back and say, well, I don't want to do that. That's different. But negotiate this up front, because we all know how difficult it is to get a seller to reduce a price once it is out there. Once that price is out there, they're already spending that money in their head. How many times have you heard a seller say, hey, it's 440. We know it's really 400. We price it high. Well, I don't want to just give away $40,000, Trent. I want to keep it at 440. Well, that was never a real number. So it's better, in my opinion, to negotiate those price reductions up front. That makes sense, isn't it, to anybody who's been in the business a while? All right. Let's go with it. Look at the dual agency again.
Trent,
if you're going to
Trent,
yes.
I'm sorry. I did have a question
No,
on the
No,
starting.
don't apologize. Don't apologize. I love questions.
Just to be clear, let's play this out. So let's just say today, the seller signs and then I sign. Now we have a contract, but the seller says, I can't list it until next week. At what point does the Bright MLS waiver come in? Or on line 28, do you just delay it a week and then you're okay with Bright MLS?
So you're saying when the contract starts, when you both sign this contract, or the date that you want it to start. So if you both signed it today, the contract is effective as of today. You have a listing contract signed by the broker and the seller today. If you said, remember, if you put on line 2B, it says this contract starts when signed by broker and seller unless otherwise stated here. You could say this contract starts August 15th, but sign it today. But the start date is August 15th.
Okay.
And even if I have a client who wants to start a contract in 2 weeks or ready to sell it in 2 or 3 weeks, I'd rather get them to sign it now. I say, okay, let's get it signed, because now I have the listing. Now I don't have to worry about someone else coming along and saying, hey, I can find you, I can get you $700,000 for this $200,000 property. And then they think, oh, let me sign a contract. I usually like them. I get it signed as soon as I can. All right. I just had a person call me whose property I sold to him 15 years ago. And he says, I won't be ready to the end of August. Well, I said, okay, well, I'm ready now to send you a contract. And you sign it and send it back. And he did. It just starts August 30th. That way, this is my listing. So if I just like to get them signed as soon as possible. The dual agents in paragraph 3, we already talked about, if you're a dual agent, you must disclose. I mean, you must disclose. Well, you have to disclose if you're a dual agent, but you must have written consent from both the buyer and the seller. You cannot act as a dual agent without consent from both buyer and seller. All right. Seller agrees that broker and broker's licensees may also represent the buyer of this property. Now, if the seller said to you, I don't want dual agency, then there is and I don't know if it's in forms, there is a single agency addendum. Then you would use that. A single agency addendum is actually PAR form SA. A single agency, because obviously if it's a single agency, you represented one party. Dual agency, you represent both parties. So if the seller says, nope, don't want dual agency, then have them sign this single agency addendum. I think if you go on the back of this document, look at the last page 6, where it says under 33A, it says the following are part of this listing contract with check. You see the second one, single agency addendum PAR form SA. So if your seller does not want you to represent the buyer, if you represent the seller, then you could just sign that. All right. Paragraph 4. Yeah.
Trent, excuse me. We do have a few questions. Some of the participants are using the raise hand feature.
Oh, I see. I'm sorry. I didn't see that. Yes, Kat. I see Kat. Yes. Go on, Kat Henry. Anyone else? I see a AC Roby.
Yes.
Either one.
Yeah, so my question, just really quickly to go back to the price reduction, what should the time frame be to negotiate the price? So after a month, after 2 weeks?
I would always say to you, my answer is always going to be, it depends. Let's say it depends on the market. It depends on a lot of variables, but I usually go 2 weeks. That's like my timeline. If you'll even know in a week, if you list the property today, and if it's a seller's market and no one is coming in your property in a week, you know it's too high. Okay, I always tell sellers the only reason a property doesn't sell doesn't have anything to do with condition. It has to do with price. I don't care how bad a property is, it's going to sell at the right price, right? It could be totally burned down. It could be in horrible condition. Some investors going to buy it and gut it and rehab it and sell it. So price. So I usually go with 2 weeks. I always say, listen, if we list this, it's $440. Going back to my example, and it's a $400,000 property, then 2 weeks is a long time if no one is coming in this property when we have a lot of buyers looking in this area. So it's best, I say 1 week if you can, 10 days, but it's all up to you. And of course, the seller has a lot to do with it too. A seller may say, no, I want to keep it on the market for a month before we reduce it. So it all depends on what the seller says too. But I prefer like a 2 week maximum. Is there another question? I saw something in chat. What was that question in chat? Can somebody tell me?
It says, if seller does not want dual agency, how can you still allow other agents in your office to sell the home?
You can't. Simple as that. Unless you're a designated agency office, you can't. Because if you remember, if you're a dual agent, 2 ways you become a dual agent. If you represent both the buyer and the seller in the same transaction, you're a dual agent. The licensee is a dual agent. You're a dual agent if you represent one party and one of your colleagues in the office represents the other party, then the broker is a dual agent. So you're a dual agent, you can become a dual agent 1 or 2 ways. If the seller is saying, I don't want dual agency, you need to explain to them that, are you saying you don't want me to represent both? Because I've had sellers say to me, I don't want you, Trent, to represent the buyer. But I say, is it okay if someone in my office represents a buyer? And they'll say, I'm okay with that. So it depends. So they may say, no, I want somebody from a totally different office to represent them. Any other questions? If not, paragraph 14, designated agency. Designated agency is applicable unless checked. We talked about what designated agency is. If your office does not practice designated agency, if you don't know, you have to ask. If they don't, then check. Designated agency is not applicable or applicable. All right, just check that. Number 5, broker's fee. Remember, fees never discussed, and I even tell agents this, brokers know better. Brokers know that they can never discuss fees, commissions with another broker. That is an antitrust violation. That's called price fixing. I don't believe salespeople should be discussing what your commission is with someone in a different office. I don't believe you should be doing that. We know we do that. How much does Keller Williams pay you? How much is Berkshire say? How much is compensate? I don't think you should be having discussions with someone out. First of all, I don't think you should be having a discussion with anybody about what you get. Okay, we know, you're in a company. Someone says, "Yeah, I make 60,000. Just got to raise it 65, and they're making 45." Then you just create a problem. I just think it's best to keep your mouth shut with if every new agent's getting this split, fine. I just personally think, and I've never, even as I started, ever discussed with anybody what my split was. I just don't think it's information you should be discussing with anybody. That's just my personal opinion. All right. But brokers know that they cannot discuss fees or commissions with another broker. But the fee. So it says here, no association of realtors has set or recommended the broker's fee. Broker and seller have negotiated the fee that seller will pay. Let's say broker's fee is on this will make up something 10%. Let's say you say my fee is 10% of the sales price, or you could also have, some companies may want a flat fee. So you could say, let's say the broker's fee is 10% of the sale price, or let's say $20,000, $20,000. That's a flat fee, whichever is greater. All right, whichever is greater. That's what the seller will have to pay. Most contracts are probably just going to have the broker a percentage of the sales price. But again, whatever your office does is what you comply with. And I have no comment on how your office sets fees or what they should be. That's between you and your broker. And that other block is if your broker is charging an additional fee to the seller. Let's say there's some type of conveyancing fee that you charge the seller, that would go there. So let's say you say broker's fee is 10% of the sales price, or 20,000, whichever is greater, and let's say $500 paid to the broker by the seller. So that's your fee. Whatever your fee is, that's what you fill in. And it says paid to the broker by the seller as follows. Number 1, that blank is if there is a non-negotiable upfront fee. If your office charges, and I suspect probably most offices don't, but if your office charges the seller an upfront fee, maybe this sale is going to be so complex, the broker says, "Listen, I want a $500 upfront fee in the event that this deal dies. I want a transaction fee. I want something upfront." Now, keep in mind, whatever that upfront fee that you put in that blank, that is part of the broker's total fee, is not in addition to it. So in other words, if you were getting 20,000 out of this transaction, you get the broker's fee of 20,000, and you had a $2,000 upfront fee, then the seller would only owe you 18. All right, is that whatever that non-refundable fee is in addition to the total fee, it's a part of it, not in addition to. Is that clear? Do I need to repeat that? All right, number 2. Top of page 2, seller will pay the balance. Now, how do we normally do it? Customarily, you get your check, you get the commission, and when the property closes. But paragraph 2 says the seller will pay the balance of the broker's fee. If the A talks about Well, let's read it. It says property or any ownership interest in it is sold or exchanged during the term of this contract by broker, broker's licensee, seller, or by any other person or broker at the listed price or any price acceptable to the seller. That is language that must be in this contract because it is an exclusive right to sell. That language makes this contract an exclusive right to sell. If you had any other listing contract, that language would not be there, because this is saying that regardless of who brings a buyer, the broker has earned the commission, all right? And make sure they understand that. B says that if a ready, willing, and able buyer is found, then the commission is earned. Or C, negotiations that are pending at the ending date of this contract result in a sale. So if you're negotiating the contract, you're negotiating with a buyer for the purchase, and that buyer ultimately buys the property, but 3 days after this contract expires, the seller will still have to compensate you. D, a seller signs an agreement to sell, then refuses to sell the property or is unable to sell the property. Well, seller didn't realize the seller didn't have enough money, found out there's an additional judgment or tax lien. Now the seller doesn't have the money to sell the property. You technically, legally, you've earned your commission. I think, well, I'm gonna say that you've earned the commission. E,
Hey, Trent.
the property and a part of it is taken by the government for public use or eminent domain. Even if the government comes and condemns the property, takes it by way of eminent domain, whatever the monies that seller gets because of course, if the government takes your property by way of eminent domain, they have to give you what we call just compensation. And the seller still needs to pay the commission out of whatever they get from the government.
Trent, there's a question in chat.
Yes.
It says,
go on.
how is transaction licensee fee determined?
Now let me be clear here. I can't tell you a fee. I'm a broker. I work in a certain office. I have a fee from my office. Any fee that you charge must come from your office or from your broker. If I say to you, this is a fee you should charge, and you're in a different office, then I am violating that. This is an antitrust violation. No broker should ever tell you what fees or charges or what you should charge. Everything, keep in mind, every fee is negotiable, but you need to ask your broker what to charge. You can't ask another broker, because even though I'm doing this, I'm still a broker. You can't ask another broker what you think should be charged. I'm only making up numbers. I can never tell you that. That's only a question for your broker. Your broker can charge whatever he or she wants, but they just can't confer with another broker to set those fees. Otherwise, they would be found guilty of price fixing, which is an antitrust violation. All right. Any other questions?
Hey, Trent, on section 2 that we're going over, I just this week got a signed listing contract, but the seller made me black out of section 2, B, D, and E. He refused to sign the listing contract without me blacking out
What were they again?
B, D, and
D.
E. And I've
What-
never had that. And I have one
Huh.
client who's been repeating as a lawyer, and he gives me a hard time on a lot of things, never this. And
I-
this new guy, he
Huh.
just refused and made me black it out. I've never in like 20
Yeah.
something years had
I
anybody
was gonna
tell
say,
me.
I've never ever, but it's no big deal. I would have blocked it. I mean, it's
Yeah, I was
not
like-
likely. It's
I
no
was
big
like,
deal.
I'll do it. Sure. We have
I'll-
a 6-month contract. Sure. I'll black it out, but I've
I'll
never
do
had
it.
that
You
come
want me
up.
to black out more? I'll black out more. But yeah, I think sometimes, and I hate to not this about your client, but sometimes I think I've had clients who want to feel a little bit more important. So they want to scratch out things that so irrelevant. And I'm like, okay, what else? And it's like, you don't even realize it doesn't matter. They want to, well, I want to cross out the list price. I'm like, well, huh? Well, we have to have a list price. So I don't know, just something to make it feel like it's important, I guess. I love myself. All right, and F, back to F, a sale occurs, again, seller will pay the balance of the broker's fee if, we on F as in Frank, a sale occurs after the end date of this contract, if the sales occurs within, we call that a broker protection clause. That number one, the sale occurs within blank days. Put something in there. In other words, if you put, let's say 20 days, 30 days, 40 days, whatever, if the sale occurs within that time period, even after the contract has expired, then you would still be entitled to the commission. If they obviously if somebody you've been working with previously. Two, the buyer was shown or negotiated to buy the property during the terms of this contract. And three, the property is not listed under a new exclusive right to sell contract with another broker at the time. C, if the sale occurs, balance of the broker's fee will be paid upon delivery of the deed. And of course, delivery of the deed usually occurs at closing. And that's kind of our local custom. You know, you get paid when the deal closes. Any questions? Let's see hands on anything. All right, paragraph 6, broker's fee if settlement does not occur. This I think is important because again, no one wants to think that the closing is not going to happen, but you need to make sure the seller understands how much he or she will get out of that buyer's earnest money deposit. That is, if the buyer defaulted. So here it says that if an agreement of sale is signed and settlement does not occur and deposit monies are released to the seller, probably because the buyer defaulted, seller will pay broker blank of or from the deposit monies. Put in a dollar amount, not a percentage. Put in a dollar amount. I mean, sorry, you can put in a dollar amount or a percentage. You can put 1/2, you say 1,000, whatever you all negotiate. Again, that's between your office or whatever your broker's policy is. It may be 50%, 70%, 20%, whatever you negotiate. But the fee cannot be more than the total deposit amount. Keep it in mind, if the seller gets, the buyer defaults and the seller gets, and there's $20,000, the seller can't get more than 20,000. Okay, you can't get more than whatever the deposit, earnest money deposit was or is. All right, any questions? Number 7, paragraph 7, cooperation with other brokers. Here, if you're going to most people cooperate, but if you're going to cooperate, it's telling you what the commission will be, how much of this commission you will pay to the cooperating broker. A, if the broker, let's say the broker will pay from the broker's fee, a fee to another broker who procures the buyer. And A represents the seller. That's a subagent. I don't think we really practice subagency anymore. But number 2, or B, is where you're probably going to find most of the time where people filling in, represents the buyer. So you're the seller's agent. Remember, if a buyer's agent brings your buyer, it closes how much commission, how much of the fee are you giving to the buyer's agent? Buyer will pay blank, and you put in, don't put negotiable or anything, put in either a number or percentage. All right. Now, I think anybody who's been around for a while will tell you this. Maybe that happened. It was happening a lot at one point. Maybe that happened much anymore. Somebody who's been around for a while to tell me that this contract says that they're going to give 3%. Let's say a total commission. I'm going to say a total commission is 10%. This contract says we're going to pay 5% to the buyer's agent. The contract says 5%, but they put in MLS 3%. Has anybody seen that? They give you 3%, even though the listing contract says 5%. So they take more of the commission, which they're entitled to take as much as they want. They can give you nothing if they want. They don't have to get anything. But if the listing contract, whatever the listing contract says should be what you put in MLS. They cannot be different. You can't say in the listing contract, the seller believes that the seller's agent is going to give 5% of the commission to the buyer, but then you put in MLS that you're going to give 3% to the buyer, and you're going to take the rest. That should match. This listing contract should match whatever you put in MLS. Any questions or comments? Anybody who's been around for a while, do you understand what I'm saying? If that ever happened to anyone?
If I get what you're saying, I know there was a situation I heard of years ago where there's an agent who say she
mention any
gets a,
names. Okay.
I won't, say, takes a 5% commission, we'll put 2% for buyer in the MLS, and then somebody saw the Alta
Listen.
sheet at the end and found out that
Right.
out of that 5%, the agent took the 3 or took the 4 and gave them 2. You know what I mean? Like out of the
Right.
5 or the 6. And so, and then they said to me, what do you do later? And I said, I don't think you really have a leg to stand on. Like they put in the MLS what you were getting.
Exactly.
They
Even
just
though
didn't
I think,
disclose they were taking the larger chunk of it.
right. I mean, I think they would have the problem with their client, because keep in mind that the seller thinks you shared the commission. Is in the seller's best interest to give as much commission to the buyer as possible, because the seller wants to bring buyers to the property. If you put an MLS that you're giving less of what the seller has agreed, you actually are harming your client. You're doing your seller a disservice. We have these fiduciary responsibilities that we owe to our clients. And trust me, this is, you know, you have a duty of loyalty. You're supposed to always put your interest second to your client's interest. Your client's interest always comes first. Well, let me just say that they always come first. So you always have to do what's in the best interest of your client. It's not in the best interest of your client to put in the contract that you've given a certain commission to a buyer, but then put an MLS less. All right, but right.
So question for you on that,
there-
how do you fight that? If you don't find out till the day of closing that they did that,
Well,
you
let
don't
me
have
let
a
me say
listing
this.
contract
I've
handy, you
had it,
can't push
but
it.
listen, you can't. I have confronted. I remember once one agent did that, and I did say to him, I kind of figured. I asked him at settlement, and before the client's came, I said, "Can I see a copy of a listing contract, just the part that says the commission?" And he said, "Why?" I said, "Because I don't think you shared that you're doing what your seller told you to do." And I said, "You know what? I'm gonna ask your seller when you get here. How's that?" So he changed to HUD 1 and split the commission. So, but that's so I just was like, oh, I want to see what your seller says. You know,
Trent,
but
do we bring that up? Because I'm
no,
actually
you
going
should.
through
You
that right
should.
now.
I wouldn't bring
Yeah.
that up. I did it because I was frustrated with him, because I had done 3 deals with him and he did it every time, and I suspected it. And this time I called him out and I said, "I'm gonna mention it to your seller." And then he said, oh yeah, let me check. "Oh, you're right, Trent. Oh yeah, you're right. I'm looking at the listing contract." And then he told the title clerk to change the commission. But anyhow, but I don't think there's a lot you can do. I don't. And I would not. I'd be quite honest. You get in what they said you should get in MLS. So I don't know how you really fight that. All right. And then if there is no again, a transaction licensee, if the agent doesn't represent the buyer or seller, they're non-agent, or whatever, this would be the buyer. They're non-agent. They're just doing the paperwork. How much are you going to pay that person? Again, everything's negotiable. Paragraph 8, duties of a broker and a seller. Brokers acting as a seller's agent to market the property and negotiate with potential buyers. Broker will use reasonable efforts to find a buyer for the property. And I would argue that if you, well, never mind. What we just talked about, I would argue that you're not using reasonable efforts. B, seller will cooperate with broker and assist in the sale of the property. C, all showings, negotiations, discussions about the seller property, written or oral, will be communicated by broker on seller's behalf.
Somebody
D,
has
if
a question, Trent.
All right, hold on, let me just finish this. If the property is rented, seller will give any leases to broker before signing his contract. If any leases are oral, seller will provide a written summary, and I think this D is really important to me. Seller will provide a written summary of the terms, including the amount of rent, ending date, and tenant's responsibilities. And E, seller will not enter into, and you have to make sure sellers understand both this D and E. Seller will not enter into renew or modify any leases or enter into any option to sell during the term of this contract without the broker's written consent. I'm gonna take the question in a minute, but let me just say, if you are representing a seller who has a multi-family property and you don't have written leases, only oral, I always ask the seller, I want you to write out. First, I think it's best if you go create a lease. I think that's the best way, even if it's month to month. But if you don't want to do that, at least write out a memorandum that says the name of the tenants, who's living there, when they move there, what kind of lease they have, they're on month to month, what's the rent, how much security deposit they have, what's the late fee, who pays utilities, put it all down, and don't have the seller sign it. I want the tenant's signature on it more importantly than the seller. I want both, but you don't want to sell a property and a tenant says they gave $1,000 security deposit and the seller says, no, they gave me 500. So now at settlement, or now you own this property, the tenant's moving out and they want their $1,000 security deposit back. And you say, no, according to the seller, I gave 5. They said, no, you didn't give 5. No, I gave 1,000. So if you're going to do that, have the tenant put his or her signature on it and the landlord or the seller. That way you don't have a problem later. Yeah, someone had a question.
It was me, Trent. I have 2 questions. The first question is variable commission. I've seen something listed in the MLS that says no to variable commission. You show up
Right.
with settlement and then it is a variable commission. And is that okay?
Yeah, so that's a variable commission just means you may collect less commission if you sold it or someone in your office sold it. So it's kind of like you saying to the seller, if here's a commission, we want $20,000 flat fee. But if one of the agents in my office or I find the buyer, I'll just charge you $15,000.
Because I've seen it where it says no for variable commission. I'll get 2.5%. Seller agent will get 3.5%.
And that's perfectly fine. Seller's agent doesn't have to give you anything. Keep that in mind.
Right.
They can give you 0. They can give you $1. There is nothing that says a seller has to pay you commission. We do because we cooperate, but whatever, I could get $20,000 and give you 2,000 of it. That's
Right.
perfectly fine.
And that is my next question leading into this stuff going on with Bright MLS and them changing their policy. There's been a lot of discussion on commission. Have you been following along with that?
Yes, and again, a buyer, a seller does not have to pay a commission. Period. That's not, you can get the commission from your buyer.
Right.
The seller's not entitled. There's nothing ever that said a seller has to pay you commission. I mean, that's the way it's been. That's the way it's worked for since I've been in this business. But I've had times where 1 or 2 times the seller says I'm paying no commission. But I said to my buyer, if you want this property, you have to pay the commission, and they did.
Yeah, I've seen that too, and you had to negotiate it. But what I'm saying is, what you're saying is what's in the listing contract should reflect on what is on the MLS description, and that is not always the case.
Well, no, that's not always the case, but there are some bad agents out there. But yeah, absolutely, I agree. That's not always. I would probably say that I don't want to say what percentage, but I would say there's quite a few people who do that routinely. They put one thing, they say they're going to split it, but in MLS, they put a different number. I even had one agent who told me once that when we got 2 days before settlement, he said, oh, Trent, by the way, the commission is higher than what I told you. I said, why is that? He said, I wait to see how good or bad the agent is before I decide whether I'm going to give them a full half. And I'm like, well, that's not the way this is supposed to work. But hey, yeah. Would that answer your question?
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you.
All right. Any questions about, so the leases, make sure you get information. Don't just take the word of a seller who says that tenant A pays X and never paid never gave me a security deposit or gave me $500 security or you want to make sure that a tenant is signing off on that. Is there a question? Let's see, what's this say?
No.
I have to jump. Paragraph 9. Broker may provide services to buyer for which the broker will accept a fee. In other words, you can still do work for a buyer and collect a fee. You just are disclosing that to a seller. Just because you represent the seller doesn't mean you can't maybe prepare docs for the buyer or order title for the buyer. So this is just saying that you can provide services to the buyer for which you may accept a fee. It's not saying that my loyalties lie with the buyers. My loyalty still lies with you. My loyalties lie with the person with whom I have the contract, not with a buyer who I'm just doing some work for. And maybe a transaction license or whatever, but Paragraph 10, buyer is not responsible for damages. This is one that you want to make sure you go over clearly with the buyer, with the seller. The seller agrees that broker and the broker's licensees are not responsible for any damage to the property or any loss or theft of personal goods from the property unless such damage, loss, or theft is solely and directly caused by the broker or the broker's licensee. So you let them know that I tell sellers, put away valuable things, put them in a safe. Don't leave your $50,000 wedding ring just sitting on top of the cabinet in the bedroom. Take away valuable things. Don't leave money lying around. You still have strangers coming in and out of your house. So just remove those things. But in the event that someone stole something, this is saying that the seller can't hold you responsible unless you actually stole it. All right. They can't hold you responsible if the buyer fell and hurt him or herself, unless you pushed them. So, so if something happens, but sellers should be made aware to you selling a property, you have strangers coming in, remove valuables. All right. Brokers not number 11, deposit monies. We also know that if you are a broker, first of all, if you're an agent, you should give that once that contract is signed, you have an earnest money deposit. You should give it to your broker. How soon? When should you give that deposit money to your broker? Earnest money deposit check.
Immediately.
Immediately. When should your broker deposit it in his or her escrow account?
The end of the next business day.
By the end of the next business day. You, the licensee, should give that check to your broker immediately. Don't hold on to checks. It should go into an escrow. It has to go in an escrow account, but your broker must deposit that check into his or her escrow deposit account by the end of the next business day. All right. So deposit monies. One thing here, if you go further down, it says, the fourth line down where it says buyer and seller may name a non-licensee as an escrow holder, in which case the escrow holder will be bound by the terms of the escrow agreement, if any, not by the Real Estate License and Registration Act. That's important because now we're seeing more and more where brokers don't want to hold escrow monies, they have the title companies holding them. One thing you should remember is that a broker is bound by the Real Estate License and Registration Act and the rules and regulations of the Pennsylvania Real Estate Commission. The title company is not. The title company is bound by whatever that escrow agreement says. So you should be clear what is in an escrow agreement, because if there is a dispute, the title company, the escrow letter may say that they decide who is entitled to the money. I don't know what it says. I personally don't think it's a great idea to have a title company holding the escrow, but that's just me. I think that the broker for the seller should hold it, or if the broker for the seller says, I don't want to hold it, let the broker for the buyer hold it. Because brokers can only give deposit monies according to the licensing law, the Real Estate License Registration Act, and the rules and regulations of the real estate, the Pennsylvania Real Estate Commission. They can't decide on their own who's entitled, which we'll talk about in a minute. So if you are letting a title company or an attorney hold it, just make sure you understand that escrow agreement and how that money is to be distributed in the event there is a dispute. Any questions about that? Look at B, 11B. Regardless of regardless of their parent entitlement to deposit money, Pennsylvania law does not allow a broker holding deposit monies to determine who is entitled to deposit monies when settlement does not occur. All right. Again, the escrow agreement that a title company has, they may decide who's entitled, because I don't know what it's going to say. But if you're a broker holding it, here's the only way you can determine who's entitled to that money. Look at the first one. Is basically there is no dispute. There is no dispute. And how do we know there's no dispute? Both parties signed an agreement. Let's say you did a home inspection. Buyer does a home inspection. Buyer says, I don't want the property. They terminate it. And buyer and seller sign the release, and the escrow money is returned to the buyer. There's no dispute. Number one, so the seller, the broker has returned the money because there's no dispute. Number two, there is a dispute, or at least there was, but it was resolved. look at it. It says, if after broker has received deposit monies, the broker receives a written agreement that is signed by the buyer and the seller, directing broker how to distribute some or all of the deposit monies. Well, we had a dispute, but we decided we're going to split it. So we signed an agreement, we give it to the broker saying 50% goes to the seller, 50% or 75, 20, however they agree. So there was one, the first one, there was no dispute. So the broker can return the escrow monies. The second one, the buyer can return the money. I mean, the broker return the monies because there was a dispute, but it was resolved between the buyer and the seller. Number 3, according to the terms of a final court order. So a court says this is who is entitled to the escrow monies. Well, broker has to abide by that and then return the monies according to that final order of court. And the fourth one, this is a unresolved dispute. I like to call this just a fourth one. There's a dispute, but it's not resolved. And look at 4. It says, according to the terms of a prior written agreement between the buyer and the seller that directs a broker how to distribute the deposit monies, if there is a dispute between the parties that is not resolved. No, I'm sorry. I'm reading. Yeah, listen. So, but there is so 4 is actually, if you look at the grievance sales, paragraph 26C. Let me see where it says, well, I don't want to get to that. 26C, that is what we call a prior written, what do we call it? A prior, a pre-agreement that, agreement, a pre-agreement, what is it called? Did I write this down? Well, anyhow, let me go to 26. Let me find. We don't have how much. No, we don't have that much time. Let me just say the fourth one, the contract. If you look at paragraph 26C, it says if the buyer and the seller have a conflict, but they can't resolve their conflict, and the buyer sends a letter to the broker asking for his or her escrow monies back. The broker must, within 30 days, return that money to the buyer unless the broker has received mediation or some verified mediation or litigation from that seller. Unless the seller initiated a lawsuit or mediation, then the broker must return that money to the buyer within 30 days. The contract, that paragraph 26C, has a blank, and you will put in, let's say it's 30 days. So after 30 days, and you still cannot resolve this conflict, and you send a letter to that broker saying, return my money because the seller has not initiated litigation or mediation, then within 30 days, you must return my money. Now, even though the broker must do it, the seller could still come back and sue the buyer for that monies that was given back to the buyer. Any questions? But look at C. Now, sometimes sellers may get angry if a broker distributes the money according to that paragraph 26C in agreement sale, and they may want to then sue their broker. And here's what happens if they do that, and I've seen that happen, not with me, but with other brokers. C says the seller agrees that if the seller names a broker or one of the broker's licensees in litigation regarding deposit monies, the attorney's fees and costs of the brokers and the licensees will be paid by the seller. So if a seller's ever thinking about suing you, you take them to paragraph 11C and remind them that if you sue me over the return of the money that I had to do according to this contract, then you will be responsible for paying the attorney's fees of my attorney's fees or my agent's attorney's fees. So that's probably going to end that lawsuit quickly. All right. 12, paragraph 12, others agree, other properties, seller agrees that broker will not list other properties for sale. Seller agrees that broker may list other properties for sale, and that the broker may show and sell other properties to prospective buyers. So it's clear that, you're not just working for this one client. This is saying that you could have other buyers, you could have other sellers, you could list other properties next door in the same neighborhood, because some sellers think is a conflict. And I've heard sellers say, wait a minute, you showing properties on my block to buyers and you didn't bring them this house? I said, well, they didn't want to see your house. That's not a conflict, okay? You can still work as a realtor. and represent buyers and other sellers why this property is listed. Some sellers think it's a conflict of interest. It is not. Additional offers, unless prohibited by the seller. What we have to do, if someone calls you up, you listed a property, and another agent calls you up from another office and says, hey, Jennifer, do you have any offers on this property? First of all, Jennifer must tell the truth, and she has to do this. If you ask a question, you have to say, if it's no, the answer is no. But if it's yes, you have to say, yes, I have other offers, and you must, according to the Code of Ethics, tell them where those offers originate. In other words, Jennifer would have to say, yes, I have 2 offers. One is, well, you have to say whether they come from your office, whether they're your buyers, whether they're another agent in your office, or they're from an agent in another office. So she would have to say, yeah, I have 2 offers. One is from an agent in my office, and one is from an agent at another brokerage. She would have to disclose that information to you if you ask. If the seller prohibits you from doing it, then obviously you can't. All right. So this just says additional offers, unless prohibited by the seller, paragraph 13. If brokers ask my buyer or another licensee about the existence of other offers on the property, the broker will reveal the existence of other offers and whether they were obtained by the licensee identified in the contract, you, by another licensee working in that same brokerage, or by a licensee working for a different broker. Once sellers enter into an agreement to sell, broker is not required to prevent other offers. If you have a seller who says, I want you, can the seller cross this out? Let's sign it. Cross out what? What? Cross
For
out.
some reason, if the seller, I don't know why, but if the seller does not want you to reveal the existence of multiple
Yes.
offers, if they
Yes.
they can cross this out when they sign it.
Absolutely. The
Okay.
seller could say, do not reveal anything
Okay.
about the offers. Then when someone asks, you would have to say, I've been directed by my seller not to reveal any information about the offers that I received. That's it. Absolutely, a seller could tell you that.
Okay, so this discussion should happen when the listing agreement is signed.
Absolutely. And most sellers probably gonna be okay with it, but if they don't, then absolutely they can, because it says here, unless prohibited by the seller, then we have to do it. What the seller prohibits you, then you can't do it. All right, paragraph 14. Seller will review. Oh, I was saying that once they say if a seller, I've had a couple of sellers before tell me, even though we're under contract, if anyone else brings an offer, you submit it to me. This is telling you that once offers are in, once a seller has signed an offer, then you're never required to submit offers. If a seller is telling you to do that anyway, then I think you need to talk to your broker, because I've seen, at least at one time, I've seen a seller do this and then try to get out of the original offer and take the new one because of a better offer. Then you probably need to get some legal advice. You need to get in touch with your broker, and you probably need some legal advice, or tell the seller, you need to go seek legal advice on, you're about to terminate an existing contract so that you can substitute it for another one. I think that you're going to probably have some issues, but you need to contact a lawyer because you're doing something that will require some legal advice. That's all I would say. But will that happen? Probably not. Paragraph 14, seller will reveal defects and environmental hazards. Seller will disclose all known material defects and or environmental hazards on a separate disclosure form. We know that we have a seller's property disclosure statement that's probably included in your form. Sellers have to fill that out. Anything and everything they knew about that property, all material defects, all latent defects. That's latent defects is something you can't see, a hidden structural defect. Anything that the seller knows about that property must be disclosed. There are some exceptions. We can go with those if we have the time, but your seller must disclose. And if a seller is telling you, for instance, that they don't want to disclose something that they know is a material defect, you need to tell them that you must by law disclose this. And 2, if they insist, you probably should walk away. For instance, let's say a seller says, yeah, I've had termites for years, caused a lot of damage. but now it's been treated, and I don't want you to mention that to any prospective buyers because they may not want to buy the property. You need to say, I cannot do that. And if you know that, then you are mandated, you, the licensee, to disclose that to any new buyer, because the sellers told you about a material defect and didn't disclose it to the buyer, then you have an obligation to disclose it to the buyer. As I've never had that happen, but if a seller is basically asking you to be deceitful, then you probably need to walk away from that seller. All right. Look at B, 14B. Once the seller signs a seller's disclosure, fills out that seller's property disclosure statement, they ought to update it. And we know this doesn't happen that often. There is a seller's property disclosure statement addendum, a seller, and that's PAR form SDA. S as in sellers, D as in disclosure, A as an addendum, SDA. And it's just a one-page form, a seller's property disclosure, a seller's property disclosure statement addendum. So if you need to update that seller's disclosure, which you need to do, for instance, let's say you listed a property 8 months ago. Well, and within that 8-month period, the seller started having problems with her HVAC system. Well, even though it's been repaired, that's a defect. And you now need to either update the seller's disclosure or just use that addendum, because things have changed in the last 6 months. You can't just use the same seller's disclosure for the year. If anything, unless nothing's changed. But if something has changed, you need to tell the seller they need to update it. All right. Because B says the seller will update the seller's disclosure. The seller's property disclosure statement is necessary throughout the term of the listing contract. And a lot of times it is necessary because things happen during that time period. If seller fails to disclose known material defects and or environmental hazards, then the seller will not hold broker or the licensee responsible. So if they do something that they're not supposed to do, no one can come after you. They can't hold you responsible because they didn't disclose termites. All right. Seller will protect broker and the licensee from the claims, lawsuits, and actions that result from them not disclosing something they're supposed to. And the seller will pay all the broker and licensee's costs that result. This includes attorney's fees and court order payments or settlement. So if they don't disclose you and there's a lawsuit, they can't come after you, or they can't sue you. And if they do, then they are responsible for your attorney's fees. Paragraph 15, any questions, any comments? How's this so far? How are we doing so far? Boy, it's
Good.
not flying.
It's going good. A lot of information.
Going great.
Paragraph 15, what was that? Paragraph 15, if property was built before 1978, if it was built after 1978, you're not concerned. You only have to give the lead-based paint addendum if the property was built either 1970 or prior. Any property built 1978 or later, you don't have to do. And I'm sure their form is in the residential lead-based paint hazard disclosure form, PAR form LPD. LPD is in your documents. This form must be signed anytime the property is built before 1978. Seller must disclose anything that seller knows about lead-based paint or lead-based paint hazards. And if they have any reports, they should turn those over. Make sure, and if you look at paragraph 15, it says the Residential Lead-Based Paint Hazard Reduction Act says that any seller property built before 1978 must give the buyer an EPA pamphlet titled Protect Your Family from Lead in Your Home. The seller also must give the buyer and the broker, the seller also must tell the buyer and the broker what the seller knows about lead-based paint and lead-based paint hazards that are in or around the property being sold. So if you sell a property that was built before 1978, make sure you have the seller fill out the residential lead-based paint hazard disclosure form, and make sure the buyer has that booklet that protects your family from lead in your home. Oftentimes, the buyer's agents will give the buyer that booklet, but it's actually the responsibility of the seller to make sure the buyer gets that. So if you represent the seller, send that booklet that protect your family from lead in your home to the buyer. All right, along with this residential lead-based paint hazard disclosure form. Any questions? 16, home warranties. This is all just telling you the seller can purchase a home warranty, and sometimes the home warranty company will give a fee to the broker for every home warranty that's sold. And if that's the case, of course, if you're getting monies from a home warranty that's sold on that the seller purchased, you really should just disclose it. So that's just saying that it's not saying that the seller's buying a home warranty. It's just letting the seller know that they can purchase a home warranty. And it's that last sentence, the last couple of sentences says that the seller understands that broker who recommends a home warranty may have a business relationship with a home warranty company that provides a financial benefit to the broker. So the company may give, I think we had one where they gave us, I think $60 for every one that we ordered. Recording of the property, paragraph 17, seller understands that potential buyers viewing the property may engage in photography, videography. Seller should remove any items of a personal nature. Seller does not wish to have photographed or recorded, such as family photos, important and confidential paperwork. Keep this in mind, because this is becoming more and more prevalent, I think, because everyone has some type of gadget that records. I mean, the ring cameras, or whatever, but just make sure your seller understands that you cannot record someone or listen in on someone's conversation. That's a violation of law. This is a two-party consent state. In order to record me or listen to my conversation, you need the consent from both parties, the person recorded, the person that you're recording. So sellers should not be listening in. Buyers should be careful when they're having discussions in someone's house. I have gotten to the point where I tell buyers, let's wait till we get outside before we have any discussions about prices. It's just better to do it outside, because at this point, I think every house has some type of device where they can see you or they can hear you. And I just would prefer, I think it's a good practice, just not to have those discussions in a house. And if your buyers, sometimes buyers want to, take pictures or want to video properties. If your buyer wants to do that, you should probably get permission from the seller before you start videotaping. And because you don't want personal information to be in some video that may be in a location that you're not familiar with. So if you're the seller, you may say, I don't want that, but don't have a buyer videotaping or taking pictures of a property without getting the seller's permission. And I've always just done that. If buyer says, hey, my wife can't see it, can I videotape it? And I said, well, I have to get permission from the seller. A lot of sellers may say it's okay, but some say no. So don't do it if they say no. All right, any questions? Look at B, 17B, where it says any person who intentionally intercepts oral communications by electronic or other means without the consent of all parties is guilty of a felony under Pennsylvania law. Seller understands that recording or transmitting audio may result in violation of state or federal wiretapping laws. So tell sellers, do not listen in. Do not record. Don't listen in on discussions that buyers are having with their agents in the home. All right. Any questions? Paragraph 18, recovery fund. Pennsylvania has a real estate recovery fund. And you all familiar with the recovery fund? If an agent is found guilty of having defrauded or deceived or misrepresented a client, then that client can go to civil court, get a final judgment against that licensee, and they have 1 year to try to collect from that licensee. And if they cannot collect the money, let's say the judgment is $15,000, they can't collect from that licensee. Within 1 year, they can come to the real estate recovery fund with that final judgment from a court, and this real estate recovery fund will then pay them that $15,000 and pay up to $20,000 per claim. So, That's it. And what happens to the licensee? What happens to your license? Your license is immediately suspended once they pay out of the real estate recovery fund. And in order to get your license back, you need to pay back all the money plus 10% interest. All right. So, but we don't have to worry about that because we won't do anything dishonest or deceitful or fraudulent. Number 19, notice a person is offering to sell or rent housing in Pennsylvania. Please, do not discriminate against anybody based on anything. My feeling is if you don't discriminate against anyone, you don't have to figure out whether or not I'm violating federal, state, or city law. Just treat everybody equally. Okay, if you require this person to have a pre-approval before you show it, let that be your policy. If you want this person to put down 2 months, then let that be your policy. Don't have different policies with different people based on race or color or religion or disability or sexual orientation or gender identity. Just have a policy. One policy fits all. Then you never can be charged with discrimination. All right. And I always say this. I've been in this business a long time. Of course, people still discriminate. You'll be a fool if you think, I've heard I've heard clients say, I don't want Muslims. I've heard people say, I don't want gays. I don't want whites. I don't want Jews. I've heard the one that I've heard more than anything. And of course, you have to educate folks, and some agents who are white will say they've heard say no blacks, no Asians, no Latinos. But the one that I hear all the time where so many people think is no violation of federal, state, or local law is I don't want children, families with children. I don't want to rent this property to young children. And you need to remind them that that's a familiar status, that's a protected class. On the federal level, it's a violation of the Federal Fair Housing Act. On the state level, it's a violation of the Pennsylvania Human Relations Act. On the city level, it's a violation of city law. I forgot what it's called. But if you have a seller who's saying to you, discriminate against someone who's in the protected class, then you need to first, I always say, educate them because sometimes they don't know. I've had people who will say, for instance, I have an older gentleman on the first floor, and if you put children on the second floor, he may move or his health is not good, so it'll probably be too much noise. Well, that's not your issue. If the person with the family, the children qualify for that unit upstairs, you put them there. And I know the intention sometimes they may be well-intentioned, but it's still violation of law. So if someone's asking you to discriminate, educate, then they say, oh, maybe I didn't know. But if they insist, you should walk away. There's no amount of money. There's no amount of commission that's worth your freedom. Okay, I don't care how much commission you get. It's not worth you going to prison. And I can tell you this, now I've been around for a long time, when they're caught, and remember they send out testers to see, sometimes they will send, the HUD will send out testers to see if you are discriminated against people in housing. They testing this, they want to say, hey, I don't want any Latinos in this house, so I don't want Latinos in this neighborhood. And you go along with it, then you will find yourself in a lot of trouble. Just don't take listings where a seller is asking you to discriminate, period. Any questions? 20, transfer of this contract. The broker can transfer this contract to another broker when, number one, the broker stops doing business, or number two, broker forms a new real estate business, or number three, broker joins his business with another. Broker will notify the seller immediately in writing. The broker transfers his contract to another broker. Seller will follow all requirements of his contract with a new broker. So you are able to transfer this. You just need to notify the seller. You don't need to get permission from the seller. You just need to notify them if one of those three things has happened. Any questions or comments? Paragraph 21, no other contracts. Seller will not enter into another listing contract for the property identified in paragraph 1 with another broker that begins before the ending date of this contract. This is an exclusive right to sell, which means the seller has hired one broker to sell his or her property. So this is saying you cannot go out and enter into another contract with another brokerage. You can only have one brokerage at a time. I mean, you can enter into one, as I said, with one that the contract will start after. And as a practice, even if a seller, and I've had this, and I'm sure people who've been in the business while have had this, sellers will contact me and say, hey, Trent, I have my property listed in blah, 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 and I'm not pleased with my agent. I would like you to sell it. And I said, well, when your contract expires? They said, no, it expires in a month. So at that point, I end the conversation. I said, listen, you can call me when the contract ends. I don't want any more conversations. Do not call me again. I'm definitely not calling you because I could be interfering with exclusive representation of another agent. It's fine if that seller approaches you and asks you to sell the property after this contract expires. But at that point, you should end that conversation, say, let's talk the day after the contract expires, and I'll be happy to help you. But you should not have conversations with a seller who is under contract with another broker, okay? Number 22, it is a conflict of interest when broker or licensee has a financial or personal interest in the property and or cannot put the seller's interest before any other. If broker or any of the broker's licensees has a conflict of interest, broker will notify the seller in a timely manner. You owe the seller, as I said earlier, a duty of loyalty. Loyalty means that all the seller's interest is put before anybody's interest, including your own selfish interest, your own self-interest. Nobody's interest, it goes above the seller's interest. Once you sign this contract, you owe them a duty of loyalty. So if there is a conflict, last comment, what is second, Kathy? We will. If there is a conflict, if you believe that you cannot represent this seller to the best of your ability, then you need to let the seller know and possibly back off. All right. Yeah. What was Kathy? You said the last discussion.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Just the last statement before we got to this number. I understand you said that sometimes two contracts exist and that one is after the ending date of the other. And
Right.
you said, yeah, understood that, and that was okay. But then how could that happen if somebody hasn't had that discussion while they're under contract?
Well, keep in mind the seller can reach out to you. You can't reach out to another person's client. So if a seller says, Kathy, my property is under contract with someone, I want you to sell this. This contract ends August 31st. I want you to prepare a contract with me for September 1st.
So you can do that.
You can do that.
Hang up and say, call me September 1st, but you can do that.
You could do that. Would I do that? No. Would I say to sellers, call me back September 1st. I don't want any conversations. I tell them you are still under contract with this brokerage. I cannot reach out to you. I don't want you reaching out to me anymore. Call me when your contract expires and I'll get your contract right away. But I think you could, if the seller calls and says, hey, Kathy, my contract with this brokerage ends August 31st. Could you send me a contract beginning September 1? I think you could send that. I would not do it because I don't want any contact with this seller. I don't want this other agent or broker coming to me saying you've interfered with my exclusive representation of this seller. I don't want that. I'll just tell you, let's wait. I think the best practice is say, let's wait until your contract has expired. But I think you'll be okay if you just sent out, if you having all these communications with the seller, I think you probably will run into an issue. So it's best just to wait. Tell them, let's talk September 1st.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Where are we?
Annette has a question.
Yes.
Are there any protections for us with wholesalers that reach out to our clients that are under a listing contract?
No, because they're not real, unless they're realtors. But if they're not realtors, no.
Okay.
Now, Annette, because wholesaling is such, and I'm sorry, I have such a negative opinion on wholesaling, but I alert my sellers. I have that discussion with my sellers about wholesalers. I said, if they call you, I said, listen, if they call you, give them my number. If they come to your house, don't open the door. throw a pie in their face. I mean, I'm sorry, don't open the door. Just if there's a question, give them my number. But at that point, because and tell them never come back. And once I'm done with them, trust me, they're never gonna call or contact that client again.
I already know that's right, Trent. I already know.
All right.
Thank you.
So I say you're never gonna have a problem with a wholesaler once you get me their number and I contact them, because they'll be afraid to come back. You go next door, don't come back to my place.
I love getting their number and add them to my database. So then when I do officially list the house, I blast them nonstop with text messages. I love it.
Actually, I like that.
That's good.
I do
That's
it.
good.
They call and I tell my list and my seller, give me the number, and then I start calling. As soon as they hear I'm an agent, they hang up. I put them on my list. I keep a list, and then when I send out anything regarding that property, I just keep blasting and blasting and
Oh,
blasting.
I like that. Oh, Jennifer, I think I would do that.
Do it.
That's good. That's a good one. Thank you.
I Nat, you like that too? That's a good, I do, I like that. All right, where are we? Entire contract, paragraph 23. This contract is entire agreement between the broker and the seller. Any verbal or written agreements that were made before are not a part of this contract. So if you had some verbal contract with the seller or some other everything needs to be in this document. So you don't want the seller come back and say, remember you said when you first came that we were going to do, no. So you tell the seller anything that we talked about verbally that we need to put in here, but only what is in this contract is part of this contract, nothing else. Okay, there's nothing else. Changes to this contract, we know paragraph 24, that anytime you make any changes, it has to be in writing. If you change anything in this contract, it can be signed by the broker or the agent for the broker and the seller. All changes must be in writing. We don't do verbal contracts in this state, or most states. Contracts should be in writing for the seller. Real estate statute of frauds requires that. Change 24, marketing the property. Where permitted, broker's option may use for sale sign, lockbox, key in office, open houses, and advertising. All media include print and electronic photographs and videos unless otherwise stated here. If the seller doesn't want some of this stuff, then you would check off. Go down to D where it says a multiple listing service. Broker will not use a multiple listing service. If the seller says, I don't want my property in MLS, then of course you would check that. Most brokers, then you say, well, I don't know how I'm gonna sell it if it doesn't go to MLS, but hey, broker will use MLS to advertise the property to other real estate brokers and salespersons. That would be, you would check that second box. Seller agrees that broker and licensee and the MLS are not responsible for mistakes. That's not what I want. It was 26, publication of sales price.
Hey, Trent, quick question.
Yes.
On 25, on section C, I had a seller recently mark off comments and reviews about sellers listings and then the automated estimates of market value. He does not want that. How do we do that? Because everything's just pulled automatically.
I don't know how. See, I don't know. I think we should update this. I don't know. The answer is I don't know.
I let him mark it and I was like, sure, but I'm like, in the end,
I don't know
how
you eliminate reviews or comment. I don't know. See, I have no idea.
Okay.
I've never had a person. I've never had a seller say to me, I just don't know, because I don't know in this day and age how you regulate that. I don't know.
That's what I was wondering. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, I would not know it even to say a seller. I just say, I don't know how I would control that. What I would say, I don't know. I mean, what if there's somebody makes a comment, and what am I supposed to do? I mean, try to figure out where it originated. I don't know. So publication and sale price. Sometimes sellers, paragraph 26, sometimes sellers will, I've had sellers, it's not that often, to say, I don't want the final sales price published. And I'm like, well, it becomes public information. Because they don't want neighbors or others to know what the property actually sold for. I said, well, it's public information. So this is just letting sellers know, paragraph 26, that seller is aware that the MLS, newspapers, websites, and other media may publish the final sales price of the property. And it's not asking you if you want it, it's just the way it is. You don't have any control, because some sellers will say, I've had sellers say, I don't want people to know that. Look at copyright, paragraph 27. Basically, this is just saying any information that the seller gives you belongs to them, And you must, well, let's look at it, because it says in consideration of a broker's efforts to market the seller's property as stated in his contract, seller grants broker a non-exclusive worldwide license to use any potentially copyrightable materials which are related to the property and provided by the seller to broker or broker's representative. The materials may include but not limited to photographs, images, blah, blah, blah. So basically, and it goes further down where it says seller also grants broker the right to sub-license, and that will be to the MLS, to others, any of these rights. So basically, any materials that the seller gives to you are materials that belong to the seller, and you can't then do what you want with them without the permission of the seller. All right. And that's all you're telling sellers, that whatever information, some seller may say, hey, I have a picture or I have a video I want you to use, then that video belongs to the seller. You can't then post it somewhere else, well, unless the seller has given you permission to do it. Paragraph 28, fixtures and personal property. You base sellers encouraged to be specific when negotiating what items will be included or excluded from the sale. B, we all know this, sellers, and you should go over this with sellers, because sometimes they don't think certain items are real estate, they think of personal property. So include in the sale, because if they don't want something included, you need to mark it out. Included in the sale are all existing items permanently attached, installed to the property. If it's attached to the property, it becomes real estate and it's a part of the deal. Free of liens and other items including plumbing, heating, radiator covers. Sometimes I've seen sellers take radiator covers because they like them and they were going to work on the next house. You need to leave them. Hardwired security systems, thermostats, lighting fixtures, and we know chandeliers and ceiling fans are a big one. Make sure sellers don't take chandeliers, antique chandeliers, ceiling fans because they like them. You have to leave them. They're part of the real estate, part of that property. Spa and pool and spa equipment, including covers and cleaning equipment, electronic fencing, garage door openers and transmitters. Many times on sold properties, I don't know if they eat the garage door openers or what. Unpotted planting and trees, any remaining heating and cooking fuel stored on the property at the time of the settlement, smoke detectors, carbon monoxide detectors, sump pumps, storage sheds. I've seen sellers take the storage shed in the back. No, you need to include, if you don't want it, if you want to take it, cross this out. Fences, mailboxes, wall-to-wall carpeting, existing window screens, storm windows and screen or storm doors, window covering hardware, shades and blinds. Leave those, don't take those down. If you don't want it, you're going to take them down, cross this out. Or, well, you don't have to cross out, you put it under excluded. Ovens, built-in air conditioners, built-in appliances, the oven must be there unless otherwise stated. Also included, if you include anything else, but if you want to exclude something, D says excluded fixtures and items. So here you could say I'm excluding the chandelier or the shades and blinds, whatever. But if you, well, I wouldn't exclude a chandelier. One of the things, and with chandeliers, which one is, if you ever sell a property with a chandelier and the seller wants to take the chandelier, it's always best to tell them to take the chandelier and replace it before you even show the house. And if they don't want to do that, then make sure you have figure out exactly what they're going to replace it with, color, size, shape, where it's being purchased, and let the buyer sign off, agree to it. So when the buyer comes back with a pre-settlement walkthrough, the antique chandelier is gone. But whatever's there, the buyer has already agreed to, because you don't want them to walk away because you took an expensive antique chandelier and put something up there that you got at the dollar store. All right, paragraph 29, taxes and special assessments. Here you put that what the yearly property taxes are. You can get that from public records, the property assessed value, if there's a tax abatement, if there are condo fees, or what are they, what's the amount, how often they paid, quarterly, monthly, yearly. Fill that information out. Paragraph 30, title and possession. Seller will give possession of the property to the buyer's settlement on or before this date. If it's not going to be a settlement, you just need to write in the date. I'm not a big fan of buyers staying in properties after we close. I just think that you're taking a risk because that buyer may not get out, and then you No, I don't know. But that's everything negotiable. All right. C, the seller has, if there's a mortgage, one of the things, if there is a mortgage, is you probably should ask the seller to give you a copy of the last mortgage statement. So you'll know exactly what's owed. Now, there could be more. If there was ever, if they were in bankruptcy, or if there was a foreclosure, sometimes they'll put the lawyer's fees and all may not show up on the may not show up on the monthly statement, but they'll show off on the payoff. So just make sure you just get a statement. So, because you don't want to get something, you don't want to list the property of 200 and you find that the seller still owes 195,000 on the mortgage loan. So you really can't sell the property. So I usually want them to give me the last statement so I can see that they tell me they owe 20. I can see that. And if they have multiple mortgages, you want all of those. They may say, they may not think a home equity loan as a mortgage or a home improvement loan as a mortgage. If they borrowed money and they use the property as collateral, it is a mortgage, it is a lien on the property, and you want to get all of them. So when you say, hey, they say, how many mortgages do you have? Oh, I just have one. I have one from Bank of America. But then they're not thinking that when they went and got 50,000 from police and fire credit union, that's a mortgage. Yeah, they bought it, they put in a new kitchen, but they're not thinking that was a mortgage. So make sure you understand, I need to know everything you borrowed, any monies that you borrowed and you use this house as security or collateral. I need that information. All right. Second mortgage was at home equity. Seller has, and this stuff I think is important. If the seller has judgments, you kind of want to need to know how much, because you need to know if you can sell this property. If there's a past due property taxes, how much, federal tax liens, any past due condo fees, things of that sort. E, if the seller has unpaid child support, that stuff needs to be paid. E, if the seller at any time on or before January 1, 1998 has been obligated to pay support under an order on record in any Pennsylvania county, listed county, and the domestic relations number or the docket number. Paragraph 31, buyer financing. What will the buyer accept? What will the seller accept? They accept cash. Everybody will accept cash. You check cash. What kind of loan? Maybe they don't want an FHA loan. They will only take conventional finance. Will they take VA? Anything that the seller, any kind of financing the seller is willing to accept, then you would check that box. Is the seller willing to give seller assist? Put that there. Paragraph 32, it says that basically the plain language Consumer Contract Act says that, well, it says any special conditions or additional terms in this contract must comply with the Pennsylvania plain language Consumer Contract Act, which just means that contracts must be in plain language, easy to read, active verbs, not legalese or technical terms, just easy to read. So if you adding anything into this contract under additional terms, easy to read, okay? Plain, easy to read. That's what the plain language Consumer Contract Act promotes. Special clauses, we already talked about. If you wanted to have a single agency, if you don't practice dual agency and you use that single agency addendum, check there. If this was a short sale, obviously you need a short sale addendum, whatever forms you need that's in addition to this listing contract, you would include additional terms, whatever you want to add. Like if it there, I mentioned earlier, if you want to decide that you're going to reduce the price on for this date, if you don't have a contract or offer by this time, write it there. Seller has read the consumer notice. You make sure the seller has a copy. You've given the seller the copy of the consumer notice. It's signed, dated. Seller has received the seller's property disclosure form, which they should have filled out. And the seller has received the lead-based paint disclosure form, which we talked about earlier. Seller has read the entire contract before signing. Seller must sign. Seller has read the entire contract before signing. Seller must sign this contract. Return of this agreement, if they send it to you by fax, is still that's perfectly fine. Return of this agreement and an addendum and amendments, including return by electronic transmission, bearing the signature of all the parties, constitutes acceptance by the parties. This contract may be executed on one or more counterparts, which means that if you send the same contract to two people, two different places, they can both sign it that document and send it back to you, and you can put it together. They don't both have to sign the same contract. It has to be the same document. I can send it to someone in Louisiana, and send it to someone in Texas. This same document, they can send it, they can sign. Now, there are two parties that own it. I just put these two together to make it into one contract. That's a counter signature. Notice with this, if seller has any legal questions, you always tell them to consult a Pennsylvania real estate attorney, and the seller signs dates. You put the name of the company and you sign it on behalf of the company. Remember, you need to put your initials on these pages. Seller needs to initial all the pages, and you and the seller both sign the last page. Any questions? Any comment?
Good job.
No questions, no comments?
Could you explain the FERPTA paragraph?
Where's that?
On our end, it looks like it's paragraph 30 about foreign investment.
Paragraph 30 in the listen, that's not in the listing contract. That's in the agreement of sale. Right?
We have it on our end. I'm looking at the document that Donna shared. It's the listing contract paragraph.
Maybe I'm using an old one. I don't have FERPTA in mind. Oops, I mean, maybe you. All right, I don't have I'm probably using an old one. But FERPTA, what does it mean? FERPTA is if you are a foreign person or foreign business selling real estate, you have to pay taxes. There's a special tax you pay if you are a foreign person or foreign corporation selling real estate in the United States. And if you are a foreign person or foreign business, then you need to know that, because taxes must be paid. Taxes will be assessed. A special tax will be assessed to you because you're a foreign person or foreign. And if the seller doesn't pay those taxes, then they can come after the buyer for those taxes. So you need to make sure, if you're dealing with a foreign person or foreign corporation, you let the title company know that this is a foreign corporation, and they will probably know that. Or this is a foreign person, so that, yeah, because there's a tax that they must pay when they sell real estate.
What if you have a dual citizenship?
I don't have any idea. I don't know. You don't ask me questions I don't know. I know it's in this contract.
Okay.
Any other questions about anything in the listing contract? What's the lottery number? I don't know. Next lottery number will be, but I know what's in here. Any other questions or comments? If not, I thank you all. Did you all learn? Because you don't didn't say much. How was it?
It was a lot of information. I appreciate it. Everybody's agreeing with me here.
Well,
in
I
the,
didn't hear anyone
meeting
else
chat.
speak. Are you speaking for the group?
I'm speaking for myself and the group.
Can someone else speak for themselves?
It was very informative. Thank you.
I have to do that check, but great lecture.
Class. Great class.
Awesome job.
All right, thank you.
Great
all.
job,
All right.
Professor. Thank
hello.
you, Trent. Hey.
All right, thank you.
This your former student from Temple.
I know. How are you?
Pretty good.
Good.
Great
all right,
job.
I
See
am
you
done.
enjoying
You
that
all.
Florida sunshine.
Hey, one
working.
important thing that Donna just dropped into the chat. Remember, as part of your member benefits, you get access to the legal hotline from the Pennsylvania Association of Realtors.
Yeah.
They have in-house attorneys there for the majority of the day. I think it's 9 to 3. You call in, you leave a message, they verify your membership, then they give you a call back. So if any kind of, get into a situation where you're unsure about a legal matter like that, you can't talk to your broker, go to that hotline, and they have people on hand to help you out for sure.
And I can say this, Matt, they are excellent. Every time I've called them, they will call you right back, and they will help you. If you have any questions, I think the PAR legal hotline is superb. They really are.
Yeah, do not hesitate, because it's not
and it's free. It's part of your membership. Use them.
Yeah,
Just
use it.
Right. They're not telling you how to do your deal. They're gonna tell you what the law is in this state, and it's really helpful. Hey, it's 11 o'clock.
One last closing point on that. When you call the hotline, what's really helpful about that is they're tracking the issues that are coming in. So if they start to see like a trend develop, maybe something happens out there. Next thing you know, they'll go ahead and maybe fashion a just listed article or a webinar based upon that information. So it's like another reason to go ahead and like call in if you're come across something. Again, it's not like a quiz to see whether or not you're the best agent on the planet Earth. It's okay to not know the answer. Call somebody, use them. So with that, have a great weekend, everybody. Remember, application for committees is open until next month. It's open until Monday next week. And with that, have a great weekend. Take care, everyone. Bye.
All right, thank you all.